Moscaritolo, a reporter at SC Magazine, and I'm here with Glenn Hazard, CEO of Xceedium, and they do identity and access management. Hi, Glenn.
How are you?
Good, how are you?
Very good, thank you.
Thanks for joining us.
Appreciate the opportunity.
So let's hear a little bit about the trends that are going on in your space. What are you hearing from customers as their main concerns or drivers? And does it differ between commercial and government customers?
Great question. I think you'd find from an access control standpoint, there's a few trends that are going on. There's some things that are happening as it relates to managing the perimeter. An awful lot of customers have spent years deploying technology and infrastructure to actually manage access into their networks. And in doing so, they've found today that a lot of the standard practices and policies and technology that they've had access to don't necessarily give them capability of allowing the kind of security needs that they have to let privileged users into their networks and be able to monitor and manage them once they're inside.
Mm-hmm.
And the trends that actually drive them to be concerned about a lot of these things are in the forefront, at least in the commercial side of the business, is an awful lot of requirement around compliance. So you have many compliance standards, whether they be PCI for a lot of the financial services companies, whether they be for HIPAA requirements as it relates to privacy around patient information and so on. Depending upon the particular vertical that you're talking about from a market standpoint, it's clear that compliance and regulatory requirements have a lot more influence on the customer today than they did before.
Oh, really?
And as some of our clients have mentioned, they fear the auditor more than they fear the hacker at times, and I think that that's a pretty telling statement when you have a very large organization or CISO actually sitting across the table from you telling you that they really fear the penalties that can be levied on the corporation as a result of not addressing some of the security needs that they have that these compliance and regulatory requirements dictate.
Oh, wow. So they fear the penalties more.
They fear the penalties.
Oh, wow.
And we had one client in the financial services space that was being fined $50,000 a month for being non-compliant from a PCI standpoint. So I think you can appreciate the kind of teeth that are in some of these regulatory requirements that they face.
So that's a huge driver then for the commercial.
Huge driver on the
organizations.
commercial side. On the government side, I think you'd find it's much more security driven, basic security driven, making sure that the right people have access to the right information and the right infrastructure within the government agencies. So as much as there is in fact the compliance component in the federal government, usually under the FISMA requirements and so on, you find a basic security motivation with most of the agencies that we deal with within the federal government today.
Probably because their information is so sensitive, right?
Absolutely. It's not just getting access into their networks, but it's literally getting access to very critical information and making sure that the individual from an identity standpoint gets access only to the information they're supposed to see. And then frankly, from a federal government perspective, it's also tracking, auditing, and making sure that right down to a keystroke level, that what you got to see and what you did with the information when you're in there is something that they can track and audit.
Mm-hmm. So you said something before that I thought was pretty interesting. You said that IAM is evolving. Tell me how it's evolving.
Well, as I said, the weakness in the perimeter, the fact now that so many companies need to collaborate, there's so much need for people to, in fact, traverse your network from a business standpoint, a supply chain standpoint, and so on. The need to allow people to interact and traverse your network is growing. Mm-hmm. As that grows, the very concern about making sure that the people that have access to critical infrastructure and to critical information are the people that you want to have access, that privileged user is one identifying description of who can have access to your infrastructure and information, but then privileged access is a very different dimension which says where and what information can you have access to and see. And that's been evolving. For us, we've seen a significant increase in 2010 in the amount of new customers that either from a security or a regulatory standpoint, depending upon government or commercial, that have all of a sudden begun to really understand the importance, the focus, budget dollars that have been allocated and spent, projects that have been identified a very, very significant difference from previous years.
Oh, wow, that's interesting. So organizations are budgeting for IAM more often than in the past?
Absolutely.
Mhm.
Really trying to make sure that they move from just securing the perimeter to more of an inside-out perspective of securing their critical infrastructure and their data.
So the end of that statement from before, IAM is evolving and it's now just starting to come to life.
I believe that. I'm sure that there's been success in the market in previous years, but from our perspective, I think we see an increased amount of activity, awareness, and a desire to really work around the different solutions that are out there and try and piece together what it is that helps them.
And then you said another interesting thing that perimeter access control is no longer enough.
It isn't enough. It isn't enough. Just being able to protect the perimeter and decide who should and shouldn't have access, and the current authentication capabilities and policy that's applied when entering the network isn't enough. You really do have to be able to understand once that individual is inside, that identity is inside your infrastructure, exactly where can they go? How do you in fact make sure they can't go anywhere they're not supposed to? And then when they're there, what did they do the entire time that they were inside your infrastructure and inside your critical information? Those are becoming extremely, I would consider them fundamental tenets of how you actually secure your infrastructure today.
Okay, Glenn, thanks for joining us.
I appreciate the opportunity. Thank you.
And thanks to you for watching. Have a great day.